Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving deep into something super important today. Mental health stigma.
Yeah,
We hear about it all the time, but what does it actually mean?
right.
How does it affect people? And most importantly, what can we actually do about it?
Yeah.
We've got some great resources for this deep dive. We've got insights from leading mental health organizations like CAMH,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
American Psychiatric Association.
Yeah.
We're even going to take a look at how media, like movies and TV, can really shape how we see mental health.
It's so powerful, the media.
Yeah.
It really is. And it's interesting because you don't really see mental health stigma.
Right.
It's kind of invisible, but its impact, it's so real.
Yeah.
Like, you can almost think of it as this wall that separates people who are dealing with mental health challenges from getting the support and the understanding they need.
That's a powerful image. I like that, a wall.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we go any further, can you break it down for us? Like, what exactly is mental health stigma?
Absolutely. It's basically, at its core, a negative attitude or belief about people who have mental health challenges.
Okay.
And it can lead to, like, discrimination, prejudice, even fear.
So it's not just about, like, one person's attitude, right?
Yeah.
It's bigger than that. We're talking about how those attitudes, like, show up in society.
Absolutely. It's everywhere. And psychiatry.org actually breaks it down into 3 types of stigma:
Oh, okay.
public stigma, self-stigma, and systemic stigma.
3 different types. Okay, let's break those down. What's public stigma?
Public stigma is, I think, the most common type. And it's basically when people in society, like the general public, they hold negative views about mental illness. So, for example, someone might think that people with depression are just lazy,
Right?
or that people with anxiety are weak.
Yeah.
And these stereotypes, they're just so harmful.
Yeah, they are. They're really damaging. What about self-stigma?
Self-stigma, this is when people actually internalize those negative beliefs.
Wow.
And they start to feel ashamed or hopeless about themselves.
So it's like they're absorbing all those negative messages from society
Yeah,
and then
totally.
turning them inward.
Exactly. So imagine, someone's experiencing anxiety and they're thinking, I'm flawed, or I'm not strong enough. That can prevent them from even seeking help or believing that they can recover.
It's so isolating.
It is. It's
Yeah.
incredibly isolating and debilitating. And then we've got systemic stigma.
Okay, systemic stigma, what's that one?
That's when policies or practices within organizations or like institutions limit opportunities for people with mental illness. So this could be anything from inadequate insurance coverage for mental health services all the way to like employers discriminating against someone who has a history of mental illness.
So it's like these larger forces that are like making it harder for people to get help and live their lives.
Exactly. Think of it as those bigger, like, invisible forces that are kind of perpetuating inequality and really limiting access to resources.
Wow, it's like stigma is working on so many different levels,
It is.
making it even harder for people to get the support that they need.
And the consequences of this are far-reaching.
Right.
CAMH, they highlight that stigma is a major reason why over half of those with mental illness, they don't seek help.
Wow.
It can delay diagnosis,
Right.
prevent access to treatment, and
Yeah.
even lead to social isolation.
It's not just about like hurt feelings or like, feeling sad.
No.
It's really impacting people's lives.
It has real-world impact. It can affect their jobs, their relationships, their overall well-being. Imagine feeling ashamed to ask for help when you need it most.
Yeah.
It's like this invisible barrier
Right.
that prevents you from reaching your full potential.
This is where it gets really important for all of us to understand, right?
Absolutely. It's just like we wouldn't hesitate to support someone with a physical health condition.
Yeah.
We need to create that same environment of understanding and compassion
Right.
for those experiencing mental health challenges.
Yeah. It's such a good point. But I think a lot of people still struggle to see mental illness in the same light as physical illness. Why is that?
There's a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
One is that mental illness, it isn't always visible.
Right.
We can't always see the pain that someone's experiencing.
Mm.
And then there's also just a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about mental illness,
Right.
which can lead to fear and prejudice.
It's like those misconceptions create like a wall of separation,
Yes.
making it harder to connect and empathize.
Exactly. And that lack of understanding has real consequences. CAMH is very clear on this.
Okay.
Mental illness is a health problem,
Okay.
just like any other.
Okay, so it's not a weakness, it's not a choice.
It is not. There are biological, genetic, and environmental factors at play, just like with any other health condition. I mean, imagine blaming someone for having diabetes or heart disease. It doesn't make sense.
Right. It's the same with mental illness.
It's the same.
Okay, that makes sense. So if mental illness isn't a character flaw, why do you think these harmful stereotypes still exist?
Well, one factor that comes to mind is the role of media.
Media, okay.
How mental illness is portrayed in movies, TV shows, even in the news. It can have a huge impact.
Can you give us an example?
Sure. The American Psychiatric Association pointed to the movie Joker as an example of how media can actually perpetuate these harmful stereotypes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The movie portrays the main character, who has a mental illness, in a really negative and violent light,
Right.
and this can reinforce this misconception that people with mental illness are dangerous,
Oh, wow.
which is simply not true.
So media can actually make stigma worse.
Unfortunately, yes, but the good news is that media can also be a powerful tool for positive change.
Okay.
When celebrities and other public figures, when they openly share their mental health journeys, it helps normalize these conversations.
Okay.
And it helps challenge stereotypes.
That's encouraging.
It is.
It sounds like changing the narrative around mental illness is really, really important.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
And that's where we all have a role to play.
That's what I was going to ask next.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about what mental health stigma is, how it impacts individuals and society. Now let's talk about what Bubby E can do to combat it. What are some concrete steps? What can we actually do?
This is where it gets really exciting.
I'm ready.
We're not powerless against stigma. There are things we can all do. Like CAMH outlines 7 powerful actions we can take.
Ooh, 7. Okay. Let's hear them.
All right, so number 1, and this might seem obvious, but educate yourself. Learn about mental health conditions. The more we understand, the better equipped we'll be to challenge those myths and stereotypes that are really fueling the stigma.
Right. Knowledge is power. What else?
Be mindful of our language. Words matter. Even if we don't intend to hurt someone, the language we use can perpetuate negative stereotypes.
Okay.
So, for example, instead of saying he's schizophrenic, we can say he has schizophrenia.
Right.
You know, it's about emphasizing that a person is more than their diagnosis.
Yeah. It's about seeing the person,
Exactly.
not just the label.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding negative terms, it's also about using language that promotes hope and recovery.
What do you mean by that?
Well, instead of saying, like, former addict,
Right.
we can say person in recovery.
Right.
This highlights their journey and emphasizes that recovery is possible.
I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
What else can we do to change the narrative?
Talk to people.
Okay.
Share what you've learned. Openly discussing mental health, this helps to normalize it
Yeah.
and break down those walls of silence.
I love that. Instead of shying away from these conversations, we should be actively engaging with them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And remember, people with mental illness, they have strengths. They have talents, right? They have unique perspectives just like anyone else. Let's focus on the positive.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate their contribution.
It's about recognizing the whole person,
Exactly.
not just focusing on their challenges.
Yeah.
What else can we do to support people who might be struggling?
Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply listen without judgment. Offer support, encouragement, let them know they're not alone.
Just having someone to talk to can make a world of difference.
It can. And then there's the bigger picture. We need to advocate for change.
What does that look like?
It can be anything from supporting organizations that are working to improve mental health services to challenging discriminatory policies.
Oh, yeah.
We can also use our voices to raise awareness about the importance of mental well-being.
So it's about taking action on multiple levels. Individual actions, community actions, and even like systemic change.
Exactly. And remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect.
That's so encouraging. It makes me feel empowered knowing that we can all be part of the solution.
Yeah,
But I have to admit, sometimes it feels awkward to talk about mental health.
I understand that.
I worry about saying the wrong thing.
Right.
Do you have any tips on how to approach these conversations in a way that's sensitive and respectful?
That's a great point. Language matters. And sometimes we need a little guidance on how to have these conversations with care.
Yeah.
Fortunately, there are some great resources out there. The Tennessee Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, for example, has a really helpful guide called Words to Watch.
Oh, I love that. It's like a cheat sheet for using respectful language.
Exactly. And one of the key takeaways from the guide is the importance of using person-first language.
Okay.
So instead of saying the mentally ill, we would say people with mental illness or people with lived experience of mental illness.
It's about putting the person first.
Yes.
Not their diagnosis.
Exactly.
Are there other examples of how we can use language in a more empowering way?
Absolutely. For instance, instead of saying someone committed suicide,
Right.
we can say they died by suicide or lost their life to suicide.
That's a really powerful distinction.
Right.
Why is that change so important?
Well, the word commit, it just carries a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
It can reinforce the stigma surrounding suicide and prevent people from seeking help.
Wow.
Using more neutral language, it acknowledges the tragedy
Right.
without placing blame or judgment.
It's about treating the topic with sensitivity
Yes.
and respect. This is all so insightful. Are there any other language tips that stand out to you?
One more that I think is really important, especially these days, is how we talk about people who might be experiencing homelessness.
Okay.
Instead of saying the homeless, we can say people experiencing homelessness.
Right.
It's a simple change, but it recognizes their humanity
Yeah.
and acknowledges that homelessness is a situation,
Yeah.
not an identity.
Right. I'm noticing a theme here.
Yeah.
It's all about using respectful language,
Yes.
non-judgmental language.
Absolutely.
That emphasizes the individual's worth and dignity.
You got it. And what's fascinating is that research has shown that social contact is actually one of the most effective ways to reduce stigma.
What do you mean by social contact?
Simply knowing someone with a mental illness can significantly change our attitudes and beliefs.
Oh, wow. That makes sense. When we have personal connections, it's harder to hold on to those negative stereotypes.
Exactly. It humanizes the experience. It helps us see people with mental illness as individuals, not just diagnoses.
Okay, so we've talked about individual actions we can take, but what about the bigger picture?
Yeah.
What can we do to create more systemic change?
That's where advocacy comes in.
Tell us more about that.
We can support organizations that are fighting for better mental health policies.
Okay.
We can contact our elected officials to advocate for increased funding for mental health services.
Right.
And we can speak out against discrimination whenever we see it.
So it's about using our voices to create a world where everyone has access to the support they need,
Yes,
regardless of their mental health status.
precisely. And remember what the National Alliance on Mental Illness says. Through powerful words and actions, we can shift the social and systemic barriers for those living with mental health conditions.
That's so inspiring.
Yeah.
I'm feeling really energized about taking action. But I also have to admit, sometimes it feels overwhelming.
I understand.
Mental health stigma is such a big issue.
It is a global issue.
It's hard to know where to even begin.
I hear you. But here's the thing. Change happens one conversation, one action, one policy at a time.
Yeah.
And every single one of us has the power to contribute to that change.
So where do we even begin? Where do we start?
Start small.
Okay.
Think about your own sphere of influence, your family, your friends, your workplace, your community. What can you do in those spaces to create a more inclusive and supportive environment?
Okay. That makes it feel a little less overwhelming.
Right.
Yeah, it's about focusing on what we can control.
Exactly.
What are some examples of those small actions?
It could be as simple as choosing to use respectful language,
Okay.
challenging a harmful stereotype when you hear it, or offering support to a friend or family member who's struggling.
Yeah. Those are all things we can do in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And remember, those small actions, they can have a ripple effect.
Oh,
You might inspire someone else to take action and so on.
it's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Precisely. And the World Health Organization, they emphasize this point.
Okay.
They challenge us to consider how we can create more inclusive environments in all areas of our lives.
So it's not just about our personal interactions. It's about looking at the systems and structures that might be perpetuating stigma.
Right. Are there policies at your workplace that could be more inclusive?
Right.
Are there ways to advocate for better mental health resources in your community? These are all questions worth exploring.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about mental health stigma, not just the problem itself, but also the many ways we can be part of the solution.
And that's what we hope you take away from this deep dive.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more compassionate and supportive world.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this episode, what's one final thought you would leave our listeners with?
I would encourage everyone listening to choose one action, big or small, that they can take this week to challenge mental health stigma.
Okay.
It could be having a conversation, educating yourself, or advocating for change. Remember, even the smallest steps can make a difference.
That's a great call to action. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into mental health stigma.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this episode has empowered you to challenge misconceptions, use your voice, and create a more inclusive and supportive world for everyone.
For everyone.
Remember, mental health matters. And by working together, we can break down stigma and create a brighter future for all.
It can feel a little overwhelming. I get that.
Yeah, it does. It's such a big issue. Like,
It is.
feels like, will my little actions even make a difference?
I understand that feeling, but here's the thing. Change happens one conversation, one action, one policy at a time, and every single one of us has the power to contribute to that change.
So where do we even begin?
Start small. Think about your own sphere of influence.
Okay.
Your family, your friends, your workplace, your community. What can you do in those spaces to create a more inclusive and supportive environment?
Okay, that makes it feel a little less overwhelming.
Sure.
It's about focusing on what we can control.
Exactly.
What are some examples of those small actions?
Could be as simple as choosing to use respectful language,
Okay.
challenging a harmful stereotype when you hear it, or offering support to a friend or family member who is struggling.
Those are all things we can do in our everyday lives.
Exactly. And remember, those small actions, they can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
You might inspire someone else to take action, and so on.
It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Precisely. And the World Health Organization, they emphasize this point.
Okay.
They challenge us to consider how we can create more inclusive environments in all areas of our lives.
So it's not just about our personal interactions. It's about looking at the systems and structures that might be perpetuating stigma.
Right. Are there policies at your workplace that could be more inclusive?
Right.
Are there ways to advocate for better mental health resources in your community? These are all questions worth exploring.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I've learned so much about mental health stigma, not just the problem itself,
Yeah,
but also the many ways we can be part of the solution.
and that's what we were hoping for.
It's a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more compassionate and supportive world.
Absolutely.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one final thought you would leave our listeners with?
I would encourage everyone listening to choose one action, big or small, that they can take this week to challenge mental health stigma. It could be having a conversation, educating yourself, or advocating for change. Remember, even the smallest steps can make a difference.
That's a great call to action. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into mental health stigma. We hope this episode has empowered you to challenge misconceptions, use your voice, and create a more inclusive and supportive world for everyone. Remember, mental health matters, and by working together, we can break down stigma and create a brighter future for all.